Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan. I've been practicing law for 25 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I often hear about this stuff for places like roadandtrack.com. Today we're going to talk about problems with muffler and noise laws. Problems with muffler and noise laws. This caught my attention because the Woodward Dream Cruise was a few weeks ago, and there was a big brouhaha over several issues involving mufflers and noise laws. A couple hundred tickets got written, and they're all going to be thrown out now due to the good work of a friend of mine named Barton Morris. But also, I live in a small town where apparently they don't believe in mufflers. Now, my vehicle's got a muffler, but virtually every vehicle I see or hear on the road has no muffler. And I've asked locals about it, and they say, they rust out, and why bother replacing them? Why indeed? Well, it turns out there's actually laws involving mufflers and noise. And here's where the problem comes in. And there's a couple of problems that arise here, but how often have you heard of somebody actually getting a ticket for a muffler or a noise issue? And well, it was in the news recently. The Woodward Dream Cruise, if you're not familiar, southeastern Michigan is home to an avenue called Woodward Avenue, and it runs from Detroit north to Pontiac, and it passes through some nice suburbs, including Birmingham, where I grew up, and Royal Oak, where I worked for many, many years. And every year for the last 15, 20 years, they've done this thing called the Dream Cruise, where for one Saturday, they invite people to bring out their hot rods and show cars and sports cars, and you just drive around and kind of enjoy car culture. Well, as you might imagine, it also gets a lot of people out there with hot rods and people who like to show off and sometimes maybe smoke their tires and so on. And I've mentioned before that in previous years, I've represented people who got tickets out there, usually for what you call an unsafe start. That is, you launch from a dead stop, spin your tires, smoke them, whatever. And usually nothing bad happens, but police don't like that, and they'll often write you for an unsafe start. But they might also write you for careless or reckless driving, depending on how crazy you got with that. So I've represented probably several hundred people who got tickets out there. But this past year, there's an interesting love-hate relationship between the city of Royal Oak and the Dream Cruise, because the Dream Cruise brings in tons and tons of money and tons of people. But of course, if you live there, it's a nightmare for about a week because all these cars show up and they make lots of noise. Some of them just rumble by your house and cause your windows to shake. And I mean, I remember when I had an office in Royal Oak, I remember one day sitting at my desk talking on the phone, and I had to hang up. I actually told somebody I can't speak right now because I can't hear. And I hung the phone up, and I walked to the window to see what was making the racket. And it was an earlier Corvette. I'm guessing, I was looking down on it. I forgot the exact year, but I'm guessing like 60, 61, right around that time. It had no hood on it, but it had a blower sticking through the hood where the hood used to be. And it was making that kind of sound where it's almost like crackling the atmosphere. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's the kind of sound that you can usually only hear at a drag strip. It's the kind of sound that does not translate into television when you're watching hot rods on television. And it was so ungodly loud. Now, I'm not complaining. I think it's a cool car. I admired the car once it left and stopped interfering with my business. So here's the thing. Royal Oak announced preceding this year's Dream Cruise that they were going to introduce their own noise standards. And they're going to lower the standards. They're going to make it even easier to write noise tickets against people who've got loud cars. And they said that with our new noise standards, it'll be easier to write these tickets. We're going to write these tickets, and we're going to crack down on loud cars at the Dream Cruise. And when they announced this, it raised a few eyebrows, including the eyebrows of Barton Morris, who's a friend of mine. Now, full disclosure here, I've known Bart for a few years. And he looked at the new statute that they wrote in Royal Oak, and he rightly thought to himself, they can't do that. And this is something that confuses a lot of people, including lawyers and city attorneys and city councils who pass laws like this. Sometimes a city council can pass any law it wants, okay? Unless, this is obvious, unless it interferes with another law that's higher up and that will supersede it no matter what. And the best example is the Constitution. Okay, so a city council can't pass a law that conflicts with the Constitution. Likewise, a state legislature can't. Now, they do it all the time. You say, Steve, of course they can. They do it all the time. Yeah, but they won't hold up in court, okay? Those laws that get passed that are, in conflict with the Constitution will get overturned by a court sooner or later, and that law will be struck down. Now, the interesting thing about the noise ordinances of Royal Oak and the state of Michigan is that the noise ordinance that was passed in Royal Oak was more restrictive than the state noise ordinance. And to get into this, you got to understand what these noise ordinances say. And this, of course, also gets you to the bigger problem of why these laws are so unenforceable. Under Michigan Motor Vehicle Code law, which is found at MCL 257, a motor vehicle, including a motorcycle or a moped, shall at all times be equipped with a muffler in good working order and in constant operation to prevent excessive or unusual noise or annoying smoke. Engineers out there should be punching their listening device right now, because how does the muffler prevent annoying smoke? I'm not quite sure what that even means. And then it says a person shall not remove, destroy, or damage any of the baffles contained in the muffler, nor shall a person use a muffler, cutout, bypass, or similar device upon a motorcycle or moped on a highway or street. But it implies you could use a bypass or similar device on an automobile, because it's written poorly. The engine and power mechanism of a motor vehicle shall be so equipped and adjusted as to prevent the escape of excessive fumes or smoke. And a motor vehicle shall at all times be equipped with a properly operating exhaust system, which shall include a tailpipe and resonator on a vehicle where the original design included a tailpipe and resonator. And of course, they're doing that because the feds require cars to have those things. So if those cars have those things, then you can't remove them unless you replace them with something identical or similar. And of course, everybody out there who knows about motorcycles, their first thought is, but Steve, motorcyclists do it all the time. Yes, they do. And they get away with it. So here's the thing. When talking about noise, it's very, very difficult to measure noise. Now, we all know that noise is measurable. Everything's measurable, okay, for the most part. At least things in science and nature are measurable. We can measure brightness of lights. We can measure loudness of sound. And it's measured in decibels. So, a motor vehicle shall not be operated or driven on a highway or street if the motor vehicle produces total noise exceeding one of the following limits at a distance of 50 feet. So in other words, we don't walk up to your motorcycle or automobile or Corvette with a blower and measure the noise at the car. We walk 50 feet back and measure the noise and then ask ourselves, how loud is this thing? And here's the tricky part, is how do you measure that? And I know that they make measuring devices, but I've never actually seen one other than like on TV. I have to imagine some police departments actually have these. The state police has got to. I'm assuming they do. They've got everything else. But for instance, a motor vehicle with a gross weight or gross vehicle weight rating of 8,500 pounds or more can't put out 90 decibels if the maximum lawful speed on the highway or street is greater than 35 miles per hour. So a big vehicle can't make more than 90 dBs, okay? And then a motorcycle or moped, 86 dBs, and so on. And it lists all these different things that you can do and not do on certain kinds of roadways with certain kinds of vehicles. But again, 90 dBs, 86 dBs, 76 dBs, and so on. And you ask yourself, well, what are these things? Like, what are these? Like if you don't have a sound measuring device, what are these things? So I actually went and looked, and you can find anything on the internet these days. I went and looked at a website, and I asked the question, give me some common examples of various decibel levels in human nature that we can understand, that we can all realize. So for instance, a lawnmower is said, according to the website I saw, 90 decibels, okay? Now that's 90 decibels as you're standing next to it. Remember that the measurement done by state law is taken at 50 feet away. So in other words, if you're standing 50 feet from the vehicle that can't put out 90 dBs, and it's as loud as a lawnmower that you're standing next to, then it's violating state law. And that's actually a very loud standard, if you think about it. I mean, lawnmowers are loud, but, so then I couldn't find an 86 decibel, but I found 85 as a snowblower. Apparently, a snowblower is considered 5 decibels lower than a lawnmower. I've owned one of each at the same time. I always thought they were roughly the same sound level, but apparently now thinking about it, I guess a snowblower is a little less. 80 decibels, by the way, is an alarm clock, okay? So if something can only be 80 decibels, it would have to be as loud as a loud alarm clock from 50 feet away, okay? And then finally, just because I wanted to take a look at this and I was curious, 110 decibels is a jackhammer or a rock band, which in many respects, I understand them being about the same loudness. I attended an Allman Brothers concert back in the late 70s or early 80s at Pine Knob in north of Detroit. And I sat in the 5th row right off of a wall of speakers. And I'm here to tell you that right now I still think I might have lesser hearing in my right ear because of that wall of amplifiers and speakers. So a rock concert, a rock band being 110 decibels. But that doesn't play into this discussion at all. But here's the interesting thing. So Royal Oak announced they're going to have this new new local law to supplement the state law. And they announced this. And Bart Morris, my friend, an attorney in Royal Oak, he's got an office north of 11 Mile, a couple blocks. I used to work south of 11 Mile. And he looked at this statute and thought to himself, well, this is silly. You can't do this. And the reason they can't do this is that the Michigan Motor Vehicle Code actually says in some places that we're writing a statute that's intended to cover the entire state. And not only do we set, floors and ceilings, we're doing both here. In other words, we're making a law that you cannot override in either direction. And they wrote this, and it says at MCL 257-707E2, this act occupies the whole field of vehicle noise regulation. A city, county, village, or township shall not adopt or enforce vehicle noise rules unless the rules are identical to the requirements of this act. So in other words, Royal Oak was free to adopt their own statute if they wanted to. I'm not quite sure why they'd want to, but if they wanted to, they could write a statute, a municipal code, and they could have written into their municipal code, we hereby adopt the state law, and so on. And I don't know if that would allow them to maybe change the fines or something, or maybe keep more of the money, which could be part of it. But they adopted the statute, and they apparently missed the notion that they weren't allowed to do that. So Bart Morris wrote a letter to the city of Royal Oak and said, you guys can't do that. You guys can't pass your own statute unless it's identical to state law. And they ignored his letter, apparently. And so they wrote a bunch of tickets, approximately 130, at the Dream Cruise. And there were a lot of people in the media who were kind of wondering, well, what's going to happen here? Because they're writing tickets that are clearly unenforceable, okay, if they're writing them under this local statute, which is what they were doing. So they finally stepped up, the city attorney did, and said, you know something, we were wrong. And in a rare admission, admitted that these tickets that were written could not be enforced. And so I'm now quoting the Detroit Free Press, some noisy Dream Cruisers are getting a reprieve from the city that's in the heart of the Woodward Dream Cruise. Scores of motorists' costly tickets will be dismissed, and Royal Oak Police will no longer enforce the city's extra strict ordinances aimed at extra loud cars and motorcycles. And this is according to Royal Oak City Attorney David Gilliam. The decision to back down from the city's controversial restrictions and the heavy fines came after Royal Oak received a letter from attorney representing 15 motorists who'd received citations, and that was Bart Morris. The limits were so strict they attracted the praise of a nationwide nonprofit group. Last week, Noise Free America out of North Carolina bestowed on Royal Oak the group's Quiet Hero Award for enforcing its noise limits while maintaining the city's popularity as a gathering spot for Dream Cruise drivers. You know, here's the problem. Not only is Royal Oak the epicenter of the Dream Cruise, but they're also a very, very popular spot for motorcyclists. There's a bunch of bars and restaurants along Main Street, and along Woodward, and along Lafayette that cater to bikers. And there's certain nights that are bike nights. And all summer long, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bikers come into town and hang out and spend their money and then leave. And almost all of those bikers would have been in violation of this new law, which is no longer enforceable. So the aftermath of all of this is that there were about 130 tickets written at the Dream Cruise for loudness, which, by the way, I think is also the name of a Japanese punk band back in the 70s and 80s, Loudness, but different story. And the fines on those tickets were $140 a piece. And they've announced that if you got that ticket, they're not going to enforce it. Now, this is where it gets strange. The city attorney has said that if you got one of these tickets, you still need to answer the ticket and probably show up. Because if you don't, the way the system works, and you don't show up for a ticket, they default you and blah, 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 and the mills of the gods grind slowly and occasionally inaccurately, and you will be found in default and bad things will happen to you, which is strange because the ticket is unenforceable. But that's the way these things work. So if you got the ticket, you should respond to it. But the other scary part of this is some people got the ticket and paid it. There are people out there who get a ticket and pay it without calling an attorney first. And so these people who paid the $140 fine might not be getting their money back because somebody asked the city attorney, by the way, what about the people who paid their tickets? And the city attorney said, those who paid might not get their money back. And that's a paraphrase. That's not a direct quote, but he said that's the upshot. And somebody said, well, shouldn't you give it back? And he said, well, we have governmental immunity, which means that he's basically saying if you sue us, you'll lose. So we might not give the money back. And I think that's rotten, but we'll see what happens there. But as of right now, if you got a noise ticket under Royal Oak's new noise ordinance, it's unenforceable. If you got one, you probably have to go into court and just stand there and let the judge hammer it, throw it out. And if you paid the $140, you might have kissed that money goodbye, which is another reason why I always tell people before you do something like that, you should contact an attorney. We give free advice all the time. Okay, people call my office and they ask me questions. And then later on, I bump into somebody who goes, well, I would have called an attorney, but I didn't want to get charged. I don't charge people to call me and ask me questions like this. Call an attorney. Call Bart Morris. In fact, there's his picture. It's in the Detroit Free Press. Got a lot of good free publicity out of this. This is why you do Dream Cruise tickets. Bart Morris is the hero of the week if I only had such a thing on this show. So again, the problems with muffler and noise laws is that, number one, they're very hard to measure. They are measurable, but it's hard to measure. And number two, it's one of those things that it falls by the wayside when you compare it to the other problems the police are trying to enforce. But finally, when the local people create their own noise ordinance, it's unenforceable because it's exempted. That's not allowed. That's prohibited by state law. And so once in a while, when the local municipalities overreach like that, they will get slapped down by the courts. So this one got slapped down before it went that far, but it would have gotten slapped down if anybody had pursued it. So those are the problems with mufflers and noise laws. I guess muffler and noise laws. And I again have to salute Bart Morris. Hey, Bart, great job. Questions or comments, as always, shoot them my way, lehtoslaw.com, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm on Twitter at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO. And this show is on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and YouTube. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye-bye.